Hello and welcome to Lutherans Alive. This is the program that seeks to tell the stories of Lutheran Christians and our ministries here in southwestern Pennsylvania, and we do that believing that God is doing wonderful things through us. With us on the program today, Pastor Larry Mort. Pastor Mort happens to serve at St. Andrew's Lutheran Church, Moon Township, but he's here today to talk with us about a trip that he has taken for a few years now. For the last number of years, Pastor Mort has led a group to the Gulf Coast to do some wonderful work down there. Pastor Mort, welcome to the program.
Hi, Tony. It's nice to be here.
All right. Say a few things now about the trip to the Gulf Coast, if you would, please. How did this all begin? Of course, after the great tragedy of Hurricane Katrina, but for how many years have you been taking groups to the Gulf Coast now?
Well, the Synod's been sponsoring trips for 6 years. This was our 6th trip down. The first 5 trips were to the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, and we stayed either in Biloxi or in Ocean Springs. But the Ocean Springs site we found last year as we began to plan for this year's trip ran out of funds, so they had to close their site. And the Biloxi site was also closed down. We found out that the Biloxi city government decided to close down the Lutheran Church's site in Biloxi because it was too depressing. Doing work for the poor in Biloxi this many years after Katrina and having the site around the church set up for mission work was a reminder of Katrina. And since things were thriving on the main street of Biloxi with the casinos, they felt that having the site set up for recondition of housing and that kind of thing was just a reminder of Katrina for the people of the city. So they revoked their charter. And so the site that we stayed at in New Orleans actually is a Missouri Synod church, which was what the church was in Biloxi. They actually moved all of the equipment and the housing facilities, which are trailers, and all of the bathhouses and everything from Biloxi down to New Orleans, and established a site there in the 9th Ward. And because Biloxi wouldn't let them keep it any longer there. But there's more than enough work to be done in New Orleans. So this is our first year in New Orleans. And after Katrina, New Orleans lost 30% of its population. And that population hasn't come back. And most of it never will. So and a lot of that was in the 9th Ward. And I didn't realize until I was down there that the 9th Ward is divided into the upper 9th Ward and the lower 9th Ward. So we were staying in the upper 9th Ward, but we worked mostly in the lower 9th Ward, where about only 1 in 3 houses are being worked on at this time. The other 2/3 are vacant or non-existent. So you'll see a street where one house is moved into and renovated, and the next 2 houses on either side of that house are either empty and boarded up or missing, because the city has now been able to tear down the empty houses. A lot of the problem with the houses being boarded up and empty, though, is unlike here in our part of the country where ownership of houses is fairly clear, where someone owns a house and they sell to someone else and the deed is passed on. In New Orleans, in that community in the 9th Ward, a lot of the ownership is passed on hand to hand from family members or from one family to another. So there's no clear deed of ownership. And so the city has a hard time finding out who even owns the house to decide what to do with it. And so when people have walked away from the houses, there's no way to know who to trace it back to. So they've been left open. And so we were working on houses where there was clear deed at this point. And the city is slowly trying to figure out what to do with the other houses. Property values are low. One house we worked on, a woman is making a wonderful house out of a duplex that reminded me often of like long trailers, double-wide trailers. And most of the houses we worked on, the people are taking these long trailer-like structures and gutting them and then making them into single-family homes. This one woman in particular, she bought three lots for $1,000, tore down 2 of the houses, has the one in the middle, and is renovating the house completely. And so she'll have a nice family home when she's finished.
Approximately how many people were a part of the group that you were a part of?
Well, our week was the largest week. We had 3 groups that went down. And our week we had 65. 46 of us went by bus, and the rest either drove themselves or flew and met us down there. That's the largest group that we've had, I believe, since we started taking the trips down. And we started out, we left here on Saturday morning and by bus. We met everybody down there Sunday in time for the Super Bowl. And we made arrangements with a restaurant in the 9th Ward for a Super Bowl party. Didn't have quite the outcome we expected or hoped for, but we had a great time nonetheless. And then Monday morning we got started and did a variety of projects.
What sort of projects did you do?
One of our groups does roofing every year, and they had a rather large roofing project. They actually re-roofed a church that was in the lower 9th Ward, near, if you've heard of the Brad Pitt project, where Brad Pitt had brought in architects to do some new designs of houses. It's in a section of the lower 9th Ward where the levee broke, and about 700 to 900 people lost their lives when the flooding hit. It was just down the street, that church. Every member of that congregation is gone. Everybody in that congregation lost their homes. And so what they're doing, the church in Chicago, a group of people from Chicago, is overseeing the rebuilding project of the house, or of the church. It stayed vacant for 5 years, had a hole in the roof, actually. And so our project was to re-roof the church. So we had 15 of the group, roofers. One guy owns a roofing company, and others, plus 7 teenagers, 6 of them soccer players from one of the local high schools, who went down just to be part of the mission project. They did the roof, and nobody believed they could do it in a week, but they got the roof finished. About 100 square on a 12-pitch roof, and they got it finished, which was really great because now they can finish the inside, and they already have tenants for the building. It's going to be used as a community outreach center. They have one man who's going to give free music lessons to the children of the community. They are going to use part of it as a food bank, clothing distribution, counseling, and there will be when it's completely finished, there will be at least one worshiping community in that building, and the first worship service is scheduled for Easter Sunday 2012, and it'll be closed captioned and it'll be on the internet. So it'll be kind of a neat thing and a center for that community in the lower 9th Ward, where basically there are very few people living in that community now, and so they're bringing people in. So it'll be a focus for the whole community.
Lots of good work still being done down there. Lots of work still needed there on the Gulf Coast. And more about that with Pastor Larry Mort after we take a short break here on Lutherans Alive. We're back on Lutherans Alive with Pastor Larry Mort, talking about the good work that he and other Lutherans from our Synod have done on the Gulf Coast, even all these years after Hurricane Katrina. It's a good reminder for us that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done there. And what's your sense about that, Pastor Mort, as you've been to now different parts of the Gulf Coast? What's your sense about the amount of work that still needs to be done there?
There's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done still. Like I said, in the lower Ninth Ward, for instance, about 1 out of 3 houses is all that are being lived in. There's still 2 out of 3 houses that need work. And when I say work, at this point in the process, most of them need to be gutted and built from the ground up. The structures, if they are a frame house, hopefully at this point you can just gut the walls, do some work with the wiring, and then put new walls in. But worst case, you can keep the frame and the roof structure, put a new roof on, and work that way. But in some cases, the houses are a total loss, and they have to be built from the ground up. So there is a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done in the Ninth Ward alone, let alone the other areas of the city. And it's not just the Ninth Ward. We hear about the Ninth Ward a lot up in the north, but it wasn't just the Ninth Ward. It was every section of the city except for the French Quarter, the oldest section of the city, which was the high ground that got hit. Some of the areas were able to recover faster because they were better off. And that's where people moved to from some of the other areas of the city. But there's a tremendous amount of work to be done. And not only just with houses, but a lot of our crew, 10 members of our crew went every day and worked on other projects as well, not just housing. Those 10 went and worked with Head Start programs. They worked with food and clothing distribution centers. They worked in greenhouses to prepare plantings, and if it hadn't been so cold and wet, as while you all were here with 20 degrees or colder, we were at 30, 35 degrees and wind and rain, and so they were supposed to be planting trees in the wetlands to help to recondition the wetlands. It was too cold for them to work in the wetlands, so they had to find other work for them in the clothing shelter or clothing distribution centers and that kind of thing. But they're still trying to rebuild the wetlands, and they're working on closing off some of the levees and diverting some of the delta back to its normal state, because that was part of the problem with the flooding. So that if this ever happens again, it won't be quite as devastating as it was the last time. So they're bringing volunteers down to even work with that. The other aspect that's very important are the number of people who are still struggling and suffering with the after effects of the flooding. There's not a place that you can go that you can't find someone that was affected dramatically by the storm and the flooding, and they have a story to tell, and they need to tell their stories. Our cook at Prince of Peace, where we stayed, was a man who his wife of 35 years left because she couldn't handle the effects of the storm. And the effects of the storm for the family was a couple-fold. One, not only did they lose their house and employment, but also their son of 27 years. They were evacuated from New Orleans originally to Oklahoma, and they came back, and their 27-year-old son, because of the places lying dormant for so long, and so many swimming pools, they were infested with mosquitoes. And he was bitten by a mosquito and got West Nile, and then he died because of West Nile disease and the after effects. And she left the family then. She couldn't take it, and she divorced him. He works with, not only as a cook for the church and for the camper store where we were working from, but he also works as a counselor at a shelter for abused children who come from families of Satanists and skinheads. And one of the things that they're finding in the Ninth Ward is a very big influx of gangs and other types of cults and that kind of thing that weren't there before. because it's been a vacuum, and so there's a lot of different things. We saw a lot of gang graffiti in the area, so there is just an awful lot of different manifestations of things going on that really, that's going to take some stability, not only in housing, but also just in the structure of the community again, to reestablish life. I talked to, we went to a restaurant in the French Quarter right at Jackson Square for dinner the day that we took our group of youth down to see the French Quarter. And I was talking to the bartender that was there with the restaurant, and he was trapped in his house with the flood. And I asked him if he would talk to the group. And this many years afterward, he was willing to talk to me one-on-one, but he couldn't talk to the youth about the experiences of that night and that week of the flood. Young woman where we got gas for the van that we were using was a student, a college student, when Katrina hit. She was evacuated to Texas, finished her degree at Texas, came back because her parents live in the 9th Ward. And after she got her degree, she moved home. She said she can't remember her home and neighborhood the way it was before Katrina hit. But she said with all of the changes in the neighborhood and the influx of the gangs and things, she really would like to just leave and move to another area to live. But with her parents living there, she feels like she can't do that because of them, but it's just so different than it was before. So there's just a tremendous amount of work to be done. And the things that we can do by going down and helping with the rebuilding make a tremendous difference. We heard over and over and over all week of the blessings that we were bringing to the lives of the people just by being there and providing the work that we were providing for them to help, just the help that we were bringing.
What a blessing it can be for the residents of the Gulf Coast to have so many come down over these years, and also for the groups that go down, for them to see the blessings, for them as we serve others. We are blessed. How was your group blessed? Can you say some things about ways in which your group was blessed by the experience?
Well, I'll give you an example of how it's changed, or how the potential for changing lives can work. Last year, Joseph, you know Joseph, my son, went, and our neighbor went with him. Now Joseph's a junior this year, last year he was a sophomore. He went to Mississippi with me as part of our crew, and he worked with the roofing crew. He loved it, loved the experience, and so did Ryan, our neighbor. When we did work on a house in Hopewell from our local church, they were the first ones to volunteer to help with the roof of that house. They had experience, and they enjoyed it. So they reached out and helped in that way. But this year, when we were planning the mission trip, not only did Joseph want to go along, but he invited all of his friends from the soccer team at the high school to go with him, because he felt it was such an important experience. And two of the soccer kids from the junior class couldn't go. They had other commitments. But the rest of the guys went. So there were 6 plus the neighbor who's older who went down. And those 7 guys worked on that roof of the church all week long and put in the effort. The other thing was Joseph, in the fall, I asked a number of the youth from the church to speak on Stewardship Sunday about how God had blessed them and how they could use those blessings for others. Joseph was one of the ones willing to speak. He spoke about the trip, spoke about the family whose house they worked on in Mississippi, and about her life and how her life was being touched, and the changes he saw in the week in her attitude and her understanding just because they were there putting a roof on her house. So that's, one teenager that kind of saw a change in someone else, but also in himself.
That's tremendous. That is tremendous. Definitely God doing a lot of good work there. We're going to hear more about that and more about God's blessings to those who travel to the Gulf Coast and those who live there after this short break. Welcome back to Lutherans Alive. We continue our conversation with Pastor Larry Mort, who has been a part of groups that have traveled to the Gulf Coast and helped with a lot of the relief work there. And Pastor Mort, before the break, we were talking about how the blessings are often mutual, that the residents of the Gulf Coast are blessed by the volunteers, and also the volunteers who travel there are also blessed. You also talked about your son and some of the young people. Certainly a lot of youth, teenagers and young adults have traveled there. But now your group was a mixed group, right? Youth and adults?
Yeah, our youngest youth was 12, who went with her grandmother. The oldest was 75. And most of my group have been with me multiple years. Some have been with me every trip, and we had some that were first-time travelers. So we have quite a mixed group, but a lot of us have gone together every year, which is nice because I have a core group then that know what to expect, and I know what to expect from them. It makes it very easy to put groups together to send out to do work projects, but it's nice to have the mix. And when we have young people out there, it makes it easier for the older folks who are along. We know who we're going to give the heavy work to. And it's also good for the planning for those down there. They were real thrilled to hear that we had some young people who lifted weights on a regular basis because they knew who they were going to give the shingles to carry onto the roof and other heavy projects, that kind of thing. But we were talking about the gifts that are shared mutually. I think part of the reason why a number of us continue to go down is not just the opportunity to give, but it is what we've seen and what we've been given back. Not in material things, but the blessings that we've received from the people. It's just truly remarkable, the connections that we've been able to make with God's people in all places. We have fun together. We've met people that we've been able to enjoy when we've been there, and we've worked hard. But we've truly been enriched by the experience, and we've been able to, in some small way, make a difference in lives, and that's important. It's important to be able to share what God's given us in that way.
For those who are watching, and if some are sort of feeling led to get involved somehow, or maybe even travel there, what words might you have for those folks who might be wondering, how can they help?
Well, any gift is important. Anything that people can share. They don't have to know how to do a particular job to go and help, because there's always people on site that can help to teach people what to do. Anyone can give out clothing. Anyone can give out food. And anyone can learn how to swing a hammer. And there are always trained people that will help those who aren't trained. So the opportunities to go are there. We go 3 weeks at least between January and the beginning of February every year. And information is available from our website, from the Southwestern Pennsylvania Synod's website about the upcoming trips. The only thing that will keep us from going is the cost of the bus. We need to find resources for that, but we are planning on going again next year because the work still needs to be done, and the people are anxious to go back and help. We have a group that goes down, mostly college students, right after the beginning of the year, so while they're still on break from college, so first week in January, and then 1 or 2 weeks during the middle of January, and then I always take the group down for the Super Bowl with the bus, the first week in February. There are other opportunities actually even at home, you know. During the summer, in June, there is the group in Millville, the Stay-at-Home Work Camp with Pastor George Mendes, and the information on that's available on the internet. And then there's Mission on the Mon for teenagers, which is a mission in the Mon Valley, which is also at home, real local, and an opportunity to break into doing some mission work real close to home. So there are ample opportunities and ample need, even in our own community, for doing work.
Indeed, right here. Pastor Mort, thank you so much for sharing all that you've shared today. And thank you for being with us on Lutherans Alive and learning about how you might serve. We know that wherever you are, there's a Lutheran church in your neighborhood, near your neighborhood, that would be pleased to welcome you. Come and worship with us, won't you? And see you next time on Lutherans Alive.